The first sign that a system is failing isn't usually a catastrophic explosion. It's a subtle deviation, a slight dip in efficiency, a data point that falls just outside the predicted parameters. It's a hairline crack in a bearing that, under immense and constant pressure, begins to whisper of the rupture to come. For 15 years, the system I called my marriage had been running on ever-thinning margins, and I, a man whose entire professional life was dedicated to predicting and preventing such failures, had been ignoring the data. Tonight, the whispering stopped. Tonight, I would hear the definitive, deafening sound of the break. It began, as most of our critical failures did, with a summons. The Sterling Crest Academy Benefactors Gala is this Friday, Elias. Camille had announced 3 days prior. Her voice was crisp, detached, the words fired like perfectly calibrated projectiles from across the vast, polished expanse of our marble kitchen island. She hadn't looked up from her laptop, where she was likely finessing the seating chart, a complex logistical puzzle of her own, arranging donors and board members with the strategic precision of a battlefield general. "I need you there by 7 sharp," she continued, her fingers a blur across the keyboard. "And please, wear the charcoal Tom Ford, not the Navy Brooks Brothers." Eleanor Whitmore commented last year that it looked mass-produced. I paused, the logistics report on my tablet suddenly feeling 100 pounds heavier. I'd just finished reviewing the quarterly efficiency metrics for the Eastern Seaboard distribution centers. We were up 16%. 16. It was a number I had bled for over the last 9 months, a testament to a new predictive stocking algorithm my team and I had designed and implemented. It was a symphony of data and execution, a beautiful, intricate dance of supply and demand that was saving the company millions and, more importantly, ensuring that hundreds of people's jobs were secure. I was about to share the news, to show her the elegant curve of the graph that represented my victory, when the second part of her directive registered. "This Friday, Camille?" "I can't," I said, setting the tablet down with a soft click that sounded like a gunshot in the sterile silence of our kitchen. "I have the quarterly operations review with the executive team in Chicago. I told you about this 3 weeks ago." She finally looked up. Her eyes, the color of cool jade, narrowed almost imperceptibly. It was a look I knew well. It wasn't anger. It was the quiet exasperation of a CEO dealing with a minor but inconvenient supply chain disruption. "This isn't optional, Elias," she said, her voice losing its breezy tone and taking on the hard, unyielding edge of the administrator she was. "The board chairman will be there. Alistair Croft just confirmed yesterday. Do you have any idea what his annual contribution means to our expansion plans for the new STEM wing? And do you have any idea what this review means for my division?" I countered, my own voice rising, fueled by a sudden, hot surge of indignation. "For the 342 people whose livelihoods depend on the performance metrics I'm presenting, this presentation determines our annual bonus structure and next year's operational budget." "A." Camille sighed, a theatrical, long-suffering sound that was designed to communicate just how burdened she was by my pedestrian concerns. "Can't you just reschedule, or have one of your assistants handle it?" The words hung in the air between us, shimmering with condescension. "One of my assistants," I repeated, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "You want me to hand off the executive quarterly review to an assistant?" "Well, when you put it like that, it sounds unreasonable," she said, turning her attention back to the glowing screen, the argument already dismissed. "But this gala is crucial, Elias. It's not just some corporate dinner where people discuss shipping routes or whatever it is you talk about. Whatever it is you talk about." I leaned back in my chair, the sleek, uncomfortable designer piece she'd insisted on. Suddenly, I saw the entire room as if through a distorted lens. The Sub-Zero refrigerator that cost more than my first car. The custom cabinetry flown in from a small village in Tuscany because, as she'd explained, American craftsmanship simply lacked the soul. The whole curated, sterile, expensive diorama of our life, all of it underwritten by the profits generated from my apparently meaningless career moving boxes around the country. I thought of us 17 years ago in her tiny Boston apartment. She was a passionate public school teacher then, full of fire and ideals, her eyes lighting up as she talked about reaching the kids everyone else had given up on. I was a junior logistics manager, buzzing with excitement about the new inventory systems I was helping to implement. We'd drink cheap red wine from mismatched glasses and talk for hours. She'd listen, genuinely fascinated, as I explained how the right logistical framework wasn't just about efficiency, but about reducing waste, about getting critical resources to communities faster, about how a well-managed supply chain could literally change lives. She saw the art in it then, the complex, vital heartbeat that kept the world moving. She saw me. Where had that woman gone? When had she been replaced by this polished, brittle stranger who measured worth in donation sizes and social connections? The shift had been gradual, a slow erosion of respect that I had allowed, year after year, for the sake of peace, for the sake of the kids, for the sake of a memory of a woman I once loved. "I'll move some things around," I heard myself say, the voice of the accommodating husband, the reliable provider taking over. The internal calculation began immediately. Compress an 8-hour, data-intensive presentation into 4. Catch the 7:15 a.m. flight to Chicago. Forgo lunch. Race to O'Hare after the meeting. Catch the last possible flight back that would get me to the gala. It would be brutal. A logistical nightmare. But it was doable. It was always, somehow, doable. "I'll be there," I said again, a final confirmation. Her smile returned, a practiced, satisfied curve of her lips. "Perfect. Oh, and the Morgans might be bringing their nephew, the one who just made partner at Goldman. I mentioned you could talk to him about an internship for Caleb." I felt a familiar weariness settle over me. Our son, Caleb, was a brilliant, quiet junior in high school whose world revolved around code. He dreamed of Caltech and building AI, not of Wall Street and hostile takeovers. "Caleb wants to code, Camille. He's never once mentioned an interest in finance." "Ah." She waved a dismissive hand, a gesture that brushed away our son's dreams as if they were crumbs on her perfect countertop. "He's 16. He has no idea what he wants. Trust me, a summer at Goldman would change his perspective entirely. Proper exposure is everything." I didn't argue. There was no point. In Camille's carefully constructed universe, certain paths were inherently superior. The tangible, technical work that kept the world functioning, that was for other people's children. And so, Friday arrived. My day was a masterclass in temporal logistics. I was up at 4:30 a.m., finalizing my presentation slides. On the 7:15 a.m. flight, I rehearsed my speech, ignoring the flight attendant's offers of coffee. The executive review in Chicago was a success, despite the compressed schedule. The CFO specifically commended my team's 16% efficiency improvement. We secured the budget increase for the East Coast automation project I'd been championing for a year. I should have been celebrating. Instead, I was sprinting through O'Hare Airport, my heart pounding in my chest. I found an empty family restroom, the only place with enough space, and performed a transformation worthy of a superhero. Off came the practical business suit, on went the ridiculously expensive charcoal Tom Ford. I stared at my reflection in the unforgiving fluorescent light. The man looking back was 43 years old, a regional director for one of the largest distribution networks in the country, and he looked like a man in a costume, heading to a party he had no desire to attend, to please a woman who no longer saw him. I sent Camille a quick text. "Landing in 20. We'll be there by 7:30. No response. The Uber dropped me at the Atherton Hotel at 7:28 p.m. The air was cool and damp, with a fine mist that seemed to cling to the wool of my suit. I straightened my tie, took a deep breath that did nothing to calm the frantic thrumming in my veins, and pushed through the heavy glass doors. The ballroom was another world. It was a cavern of tasteful opulence, bathed in a warm golden light from chandeliers that dripped crystals like frozen tears. The air hummed with the murmur of 200 of the wealthiest, most influential people in the region. The scent of expensive perfume, floral arrangements that probably cost more than my first mortgage payment, and catered food hung heavy in the air. I spotted her immediately. It was impossible not to. Camille was in her element, the gravitational center of a small, powerful cluster of people near the middle of the room. She was radiant in a midnight blue gown that clung to her frame, her dark hair swept up in an elegant chignon. She was holding court, a champagne flute held delicately in one hand, the other resting lightly on the arm of a man I recognized from the glossy pages of business magazines. Alistair Croft, the tech billionaire, CEO of Nexus Innovations. His wife Charlotte stood beside him, along with the board chairman and his husband. I started making my way toward them, my path a careful navigation through a sea of tuxedos and designer dresses. I felt a dozen pairs of eyes flick over me, assess me, and dismiss me in the space of a heartbeat. I was not part of their world. I was an accessory, summoned to complete a picture. I snagged a glass of champagne from a passing server, the cold glass a small solid anchor in the overwhelming sensory tide. Camille saw me approaching. I watched her eyes track my progress across the room. There was no smile of welcome, no subtle nod of acknowledgement. Her gaze flicked over me for a fraction of a second, registering my presence, my compliance with her dress code, and then returned to Alistair Croft, as if I were nothing more than a waiter checking on her table. Which is why our STEM initiative is so crucial, she was saying as I reached the edge of their circle, her voice smooth and persuasive. These children will be inheriting a world transformed by technology. We're not just teaching them facts, we're cultivating a mindset of innovation. How? I slid in next to her, my shoulder almost brushing hers. Camille, I said, my voice lower than I intended. Sorry I'm a bit late. She turned, her smile as professional and cool, as if she were addressing a junior faculty member. Elias, glad you could join us. She offered no explanation for my tardiness, no mention of my frantic cross-country scramble to be here, no introduction to the people who didn't know me. She immediately pivoted back to the conversation, leaving me standing on the periphery. Alistair was just sharing some fascinating insights about the future tech landscape, she continued, her focus entirely on him. The implications for education are profound. I decided to force the issue. I couldn't stand there like a silent appendage. I extended my hand to the tech CEO. Elias Vance, I don't think we've been formally introduced, though I've heard great things about your contributions to Sterling Crest. His handshake was firm, his eyes sharp and intelligent. Alistair Croft, a pleasure. Camille speaks very highly of your support for the school. My support. The phrasing landed like a sharp jab. Not our partnership, not our shared commitment. My support, as if I were a silent, anonymous donor, my only contribution a check signed from a joint account, rather than her husband of 15 years, the father of her children, the man whose grueling work funded the very life she was so proudly curating. And what is it you do, Elias? Asked the board chairman's husband, a man with a kind, curious face. Before I could form a response, before I could explain the complex, vital work I was so proud of, Camille interjected. Her voice was light, almost playful, but it carried an edge of steel I knew all too well. It was the tone she used to subtly diminish, to put things and people in their proper place. Elias manages logistics for a distribution company, she said. Manages logistics. It was technically true, in the same way that saying a surgeon cuts people up is technically true. It was a deliberate, calculated reduction of my entire career into 3 bland, unimpressive words. Regional director, actually, I corrected, keeping my own voice even, refusing to betray the sting of her words. I oversee supply chain operations across the 7 states on the eastern seaboard. Fascinating, Alistair Croft said, and to my surprise, he seemed genuinely interested. His eyes held mine. The logistics sector has been undergoing a massive disruption. How are you handling the AI integration challenges? We've been investing heavily in that space. It was a real question, an intelligent, informed question from a man who understood that the world ran on more than just code and capital. My world, my work, was suddenly being seen and acknowledged. I felt a surge of professional pride. I could have talked for hours about this. I could have told him about our new predictive stocking system, the one that was showing a 16% efficiency gain, the one that was the culmination of my life's work thus far. But before a single syllable could leave my lips, Camille laughed. It was a light, tinkling sound, the kind of laugh designed to charm and disarm. She placed her hand on Alistair's arm, a gesture of intimate alliance, drawing his attention back to her, away from me. Elias manages boxes, she said, her voice carrying just enough for the entire circle to hear. The words were clear, dismissive, and dripping with a condescension so profound it was almost breathtaking. We shape future leaders. She gestured elegantly around their little circle, a queen surveying her court. Your daughter Emma is absolutely thriving in our advanced physics program, by the way. Dr. Reynolds tells me she has real potential for MIT. And there it was. The system failure. The catastrophic rupture, the sound of 15 years of carefully managed compromises, of swallowed pride and quiet sacrifices, shattering into a million irreparable pieces on the polished floor of that elegant ballroom. Elias manages boxes. The world seemed to slow down. The murmur of the party faded to a dull roar in my ears. I saw Alistair Croft's face shift, a flicker of discomfort in his eyes as he glanced from Camille's smiling face to my frozen one. The other couple shuffled their feet. They had all heard it. They had all understood the context. In a single, devastating sentence, my wife had defined me, dismissed me, and cast me as the mundane, functional baggage in her glamorous, important life. I stood there, 43 years old, a man at the top of his field, a man who had just secured the future of his entire division, and I had never felt so small, so utterly insignificant. The champagne flute in my hand felt impossibly heavy. My Tom Ford suit felt like a cheap costume. A hot, suffocating wave of shame and anger washed over me, so potent it was almost dizzying. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, trapped thing. I had to get out. I had to breathe air that wasn't thick with her casual contempt. "Excuse me," I said, my voice a strained whisper that was barely audible. I set my untouched champagne down on the tray of a passing server with a hand that was surprisingly steady. "I need some air." I turned and walked away before anyone could respond. I didn't look at Camille. I didn't want to see the triumph, or even worse, the complete lack of awareness in her eyes. I just walked, my posture rigid, my gaze fixed on the ornate doors at the far end of the ballroom. Each step was an act of supreme self-control, a battle to maintain my composure through sheer force of will. I made it through the ballroom, through the grand hotel lobby with its hushed carpets and gleaming marble, and finally pushed through the revolving doors out into the cool, damp night. The city air, filled with the scent of rain and exhaust fumes, felt cleaner, purer than anything in that gilded cage. Only then, alone on the sidewalk with the city lights blurring around me, did my hands begin to shake. 15 years of marriage, 2 children, a shared history, countless sacrifices and compromises, all of it, everything I was, everything I did, reduced to a single contemptuous phrase. Elias manages boxes. I loosened the knot of my tie, the silk suddenly feeling like a noose. I took one deep, shuddering breath, then another. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, a text from Camille. "Where did you go? The Fosters just arrived and want to discuss the summer sailing program with us." No acknowledgement, no apology, no sense that anything was wrong. Just another social obligation, another box to be checked on her meticulously planned evening, a box I was now failing to tick. The system was running as usual. She hadn't even registered the failure. My thumbs moved over the screen, my movements stiff and deliberate. "I'm going home. Enjoy shaping future leaders." Then I turned off my phone, hailed the first taxi I saw, and left her there, alone in her world of shimmering importance. The battle was over. The war was about to begin. The taxi ride home was a blur of smeared neon and rain-slicked streets. I didn't register the route, the turns, or the time. My mind was a closed loop, replaying a single 5-word sentence. Elias manages boxes. It was an epitaph for a marriage I had just realized was already dead. I had simply been showing up to tend its grave. I paid the driver with a crumpled bill from my wallet, walked up the stone pathway to the house that had never truly felt like my home, and let myself in. The silence was absolute. The house was a museum of Camille's taste, a collection of objects and surfaces designed for display, not for living. Tonight, it felt like a mausoleum. I didn't turn on the lights. I walked through the cavernous foyer, my footsteps echoing on the imported slate, and went into the living room. I bypassed the stiff, architectural sofa and sank into the one comfortable armchair in the house, a worn leather piece I'd fought to keep from my bachelor apartment, a relic from a life before Camille's curated aesthetic. And then I waited. I didn't know what I was waiting for. An apology? A confrontation? The final, formal end? I poured myself a glass of scotch, the amber liquid catching the faint moonlight filtering through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The ice clinked against the crystal, the only sound in the house. It was the sound of solitude. I sat there in the dark for hours, not thinking, not planning, just feeling the full, crushing weight of 15 years of self-deception settling upon me. I had mistaken tolerance for peace, accommodation for love. I saw the pattern now, the thousands of small concessions, the little dismissals, the jokes at my expense that weren't really jokes. They weren't random data points. They were the clear, upward trend line of her contempt. The garage door rumbled open a little after midnight. I heard the soft thud of her car door, the click of her heels on the slate, the rustle of her gown as she entered the foyer. She flipped on the lights. The sudden, sterile glare of the recessed lighting was a physical shock. She gasped, startled to find me there, a silhouette in her otherwise perfect room. Elias, what are you doing sitting in the dark? She demanded, her voice sharp with irritation, not concern. She dropped her clutch on the glass console table with a sharp clatter. And what on earth was that performance? Leaving like that? I had to make excuses for you all night. I took a slow sip of my scotch, letting the warmth spread through my chest, a small, defiant fire against the encroaching cold. What excuses did you make, Camille? I asked, my voice eerily calm. Did you tell them I had an emergency shipment of boxes to manage? Her eyes narrowed. The mask of the gracious hostess was gone, replaced by the hard, impatient glare I knew so well. You're being ridiculous. It was a figure of speech, a joke. No, I said, setting my glass down on the coaster beside me with a precise, deliberate motion. No, it wasn't. It was a deliberate public dismissal of me, of my work, of my value, in front of the very people you wanted to impress. It was the truth of how you see me. Oh, for God's sake, don't be so melodramatic, she scoffed, kicking off her heels. You're overreacting. It was nothing. It wasn't nothing to me. The calmness in my own voice surprised me. It wasn't the quiet before a storm. It was the stillness after it has passed, when the air is clear and you can finally see the wreckage. I stood up, feeling as if I were moving through water. When was the last time you asked me about my work, Camille? Not the superficial, how was your day, but actually showed genuine interest in what I do, in what matters to me. She sighed dramatically, rubbing her temples. I'm sorry if your feelings were hurt, all right, but you have to understand the context. Those people are important. Those people, I interrupted, the words a low growl. Those people don't pay our mortgage. They don't fund Caleb's and Nora's college accounts. They don't keep the lights on in this house or pay for the custom cabinetry from Tuscany. I do that, Camille, with my apparently meaningless career moving boxes around. That's not fair. My work contributes. Your work, I said, stepping closer, my voice dropping but gaining intensity, pays for your wardrobe and the caterer for your dinner parties. It pays less than a third of what mine does. And that's fine. I have never once, in 15 years, made you feel less than for that. I have never complained about being the primary earner. What I can no longer accept is being treated as if I am somehow less than you because of it. Her face hardened, her expression turning to stone. So, this is about money. How typically male? No, I said, taking a deep breath, the finality of the moment washing over me. This is about respect, basic human respect, the kind you give to a stranger, let alone the person you promised to build a life with. I looked into her eyes and saw nothing of the woman I had married. I saw only a stranger, a polished, ambitious executive who saw me as a line item in her budget, a functional but unglamorous asset. I think we should separate. The words hung in the air between us, heavy and irrevocable. Camille's expression shifted from anger to disbelief, then to a flicker of something that might have been fear before it was quickly suppressed. You can't be serious. Over one comment at a party? It's not one comment, I said, the weariness of 1,000 such moments in my voice. It's a pattern. It's years of subtle digs, of dismissive remarks, of your clear and palpable embarrassment about who I am and what I do. Tonight was just the final report, the one that confirmed the system has failed beyond repair. She stared at me, speechless for once. Her mind, I knew, was not processing the emotional impact, but calculating the logistical and social fallout. What about the children? She finally asked, her voice quiet, tactical. The thought of Caleb and Nora was a physical blow, a fist clenching around my heart. The children, I said, my own voice softening with pain, deserve to see their father treated with dignity. What kind of example are we setting for them if they grow up watching you treat me like I'm beneath you? You're being emotional, Elias. We can discuss this tomorrow when you've calmed down. I shook my head slowly. I'm not being emotional. For the first time in years, I'm seeing things with perfect clarity. I turned away from her, the conversation over. I'll sleep in the guest room tonight. We can talk logistics tomorrow. Logistics? She repeated, and a bitter, humorless laugh escaped her lips. How appropriate. I didn't answer. I left her standing there, a solitary, perfect statue in her beautiful, empty living room, and walked upstairs. I felt strangely calm, a hollowed-out tranquility that comes after a long and brutal storm. I was done being the less important partner, done apologizing for a career that supported our family and that, despite Camille's dismissal, made a real and tangible difference in the world. I didn't know it then, but I had just stepped off a well-worn path onto a new, terrifying chessboard, and my opponent had already planned her opening moves. The next few weeks were a blur of tense, whispered conversations conducted in rooms with closed doors. We operated with the cold, functional politeness of business partners dissolving a failed venture. The hardest part, the task I had dreaded more than any other, was telling the children. We sat them down in the family room, a space so rarely used it still had the faint scent of new carpet. Camille and I sat on the sofa, a careful foot of space between us, a demilitarized zone. Caleb, at 16, slouched in an armchair, his long limbs folded awkwardly, his eyes already narrowed with the cynical wisdom of a teenager who knows that no conversation beginning with, "We need to talk to you," ever ends well. Nora, our bright, sensitive 12-year-old, sat cross-legged on the floor, looking from my face to her mother's, her expression a mixture of confusion and dawning fear. We delivered the lines we had rehearsed. We both loved them very much. This wasn't their fault. We would always be a family, just in a different way. The words felt like lies, cheap, hollow platitudes, designed to patch a wound that was gushing. Caleb received the news with a stoic, unnerving silence. He just nodded, his gaze fixed on a point on the wall somewhere over my shoulder. He was already retreating into himself, building fortifications I wasn't sure I'd be able to breach. But Nora fell apart. Her face crumpled, and a heartbreaking sob escaped her lips. "But why?" she cried, tears streaming down her cheeks, leaving glistening tracks on her skin. "Why can't you just say sorry to each other? How do you explain the concept of eroded respect to a 12-year-old? How do you tell your child that some breaches can't be repaired with a simple apology? That the foundations of their world have cracked because their mother saw their father as nothing more than a manager of boxes?" I looked at Camille, hoping she would step in, but she was staring straight ahead, her jaw tight, a portrait of strained composure. She was treating this like a difficult parent-teacher conference, a problem to be managed, not a family to be mended. I slid off the sofa and onto the floor in front of Nora, taking her small hands in mine. "Sweetheart," I began, my voice thick with unshed tears. Sometimes grown-ups can love their children very much, but they just can't live together anymore. It doesn't change how much I love you. Nothing will ever change that." Her questions came in a torrent, each one a fresh stab of guilt. "Where will you live? Will I still see you? Do we have to move?" I moved into a furnished apartment a week later. It was a sterile, impersonal place with beige walls and furniture that smelled of cleaning chemicals and the faint ghosts of other people's temporary lives. I set up rooms for Caleb and Nora, buying new bedding and posters I thought they'd like. A desperate attempt to paint a thin veneer of home over the stark reality of our fractured family. For 17 days, a fragile, unspoken truce held. We created a temporary custody schedule. We divided household responsibilities via text message. We were coldly practical, brutally efficient. I clung to the hope that we could navigate this with some semblance of dignity for the sake of the children. On the 18th day, the bomb landed. It arrived not with a bang, but with a quiet ping from my laptop. An email. The subject line was stark. "Brennan v. Brennan, legal representation." I opened it. The sender was a Gerald Hoffman, a name I didn't recognize. "Mr. Vance," the message began, the formal address a cold slap in the face. "I have been retained by Camille Preston regarding your pending divorce. She has instructed me to inform you that she will be pursuing full physical custody of your minor children, Caleb and Nora Vance. Reasonable visitation rights will be granted to you as determined by the court." I read the sentence again and again. The words swam before my eyes, the screen blurring. A roaring sound filled my ears, like the ocean during a storm. Full physical custody. Reasonable visitation rights. The phrases were legal jargon, clinical and detached, but their meaning was a knife in my gut. It meant I would become a weekend father, a visitor in my own children's lives, a guest who gets to take them to dinner and movies while she made all the real decisions, shaped their lives, and controlled the narrative. We had explicitly agreed to a 50-50 arrangement. We had promised the children their lives would change as little as possible. It was a lie. It was all a lie. This was her next move on the chessboard. A brutal, calculated gambit to take my queen, my rooks, everything that mattered. My hands were shaking as I dialed her number. She answered on the second ring. "What is this, Camille?" I demanded, my voice raw. "I assume you've heard from Gerald," she replied. Her voice was maddeningly calm, as if she were discussing the catering for her next school event. There was no emotion, no regret, only the cool efficiency of a strategist executing a plan. "We had an agreement," I yelled, my control finally shattering. "We promised them!" That was before I had time to consult with professionals and really consider what's best for the children, she said, the condescending piety in her tone making me physically ill. "And you've decided that barely seeing their father is what's best for them?" The hurt and anger in my voice was a palpable thing. "Don't be dramatic, Elias. You'd still see them. But let's be realistic. Your work schedule has never been compatible with primary caregiving. You're constantly traveling, working late, dealing with your logistical issues." There it was again. The same weapon, the same casual dismissal of my life's work, now repurposed to take my children from me. "My logistical issues," I said through clenched teeth, "pay for their private school tuition, their music lessons, their summer camps. And I have never, not once, missed a parent-teacher conference, a school play, or a doctor's appointment because of work. You know that." "That's not how I remember it," she said coolly. "But we can let the court decide what arrangement is most suitable." Click. She hung up. I stood in the middle of my beige, soulless apartment, the phone still pressed to my ear, listening to the dead air. The hurt was gone, replaced by something cold and hard and sharp. A quiet, focused rage. She thought she could use my dedication to my career against me. She thought she could paint me as the absent father, the workaholic provider. She thought she could erase me. She had miscalculated. She had mistaken my patience for weakness. She had forgotten who I was. I was a logistics director. I didn't just react to problems. I anticipated them. I analyzed systems, identified weaknesses, and engineered solutions. Camille had just declared war. She had laid out the terms of engagement. She had chosen the battlefield. And she had no idea that for the last 3 years, I had been unconsciously, meticulously, gathering the ammunition I would need to win it. I took a deep breath, my heart rate steadying, my mind clearing. The emotional chaos receded, replaced by the cold, clear logic of the profession she so despised. I opened my laptop, went to the search bar, and typed, "Best divorce attorney, family law, high conflict." I would not be a weekend father. I would not be erased. I would fight for my children with the same relentless, data-driven precision I brought to everything else in my life. The game was on, and I was ready to play. The law firm of Harding, Chen and Associates did not occupy a space in one of the city's opulent glass and steel skyscrapers. Instead, it was housed in a renovated pre-war building, a fortress of granite and brick that seemed to exude a quiet, unshakable permanence. The lobby was a study in controlled tranquility, cool slate floors, minimalist art on the walls, and the quiet, ambient hum of a hidden air system. There was no mahogany, no plush leather, no ostentatious displays of wealth. It was a space designed for clarity, not comfort, for strategy, not posturing. It was, I would soon learn, a perfect reflection of the woman I was about to meet. I gave my name to the receptionist, who directed me to a waiting area with chairs that were more sculptural than comfortable. I sat on the edge of one, my leg jiggling with a nervous energy that felt alien and unwelcome. For 2 days, I had been operating on pure, cold rage. It had been a fuel, propelling me through the initial shock and into action. But now, sitting in this silent, controlled environment, the rage was beginning to cool, and what lay beneath it was a raw, terrifying fear. The fear of losing my children, the fear that Camille, with her social grace, her powerful connections, and her compelling, ready-made narrative, would simply outmaneuver me. She had been playing chess while I hadn't even known there was a board. A door opened, and a woman emerged. "Mr. Vance?" "Sloan Harding." Please, come in. She was not what I expected. She was younger, perhaps in her early 40s, with dark hair pulled back into a severe but elegant knot. She wore a simple, impeccably tailored gray dress. The only adornment, a slim, modern silver bracelet, but it was her eyes that held my attention. They were a deep, intelligent brown, and they seemed to see everything, to analyze and assess with a speed that was almost unnerving. There was no artifice about her, no practiced sympathy. She radiated a quiet, formidable competence that was both intimidating and deeply reassuring. Her office was like the lobby, minimalist, modern, and ruthlessly organized. A sleek desk, 2 chairs, and a wall of windows that looked out over the city's chaotic rooftops. The view was the only decoration. She gestured for me to sit, and then took her place behind the desk, not leaning back but sitting forward, her hands clasped on the blotter. "Coffee?" she asked. "No, thank you." "Good. Let's not waste time." She opened a thin file that contained nothing but a single yellow legal pad and a pen. "I've read the initial email from your wife's counsel. Tell me what he left out. Tell me everything." And so, I did. I started with the gala, with the casual, soul-crushing cruelty of Camille's words. I tried to explain the years of quiet erosion that had led to that moment, the feeling of being an accessory in my own life. I told her about the confrontation, about our agreement to separate amicably, and then about the blindsiding demand for full custody. As I spoke, the carefully constructed walls of my anger began to crumble, and the raw pain of it all, the profound sense of betrayal, seeped into my voice. I was a man who managed global supply chains, who could predict the ripple effects of a dock workers' strike in Singapore on a retail shelf in Ohio. But I had failed to predict the collapse of my own home. Sloane listened without interruption. She didn't take notes. She just watched me, her gaze steady and unwavering. It was an unnerving level of focus, as if she were absorbing not just my words, but the emotions, the subtext, the entire complex system of my failed marriage. When I finally finished, the silence in the room was heavy. "All right," she said, her voice calm and even. "So, she blindsided you. It's a common tactic, designed to throw you off balance and force you into a defensive position from the start." She finally picked up her pen. "Why do you believe she's doing this, in your gut? Is it leverage for a larger financial settlement? Is it a genuine, albeit misguided, concern for the children? Or is it personal vindictiveness?" I considered the question, grateful for its directness. It forced me to move past the pain and into analysis. "All of the above, probably," I said slowly. "Camille is used to winning. She needs to control the narrative. Socially, the story of a devoted mother fighting for her children against a career-obsessed absentee father is a powerful one. It makes her the victim, the hero. But mostly, I think it's about control. She needs to have the upper hand, always." Sloane nodded, a single, sharp motion. She made her first note on the pad. "And what is your priority here, Mr. Vance? What is the single, non-negotiable outcome you are seeking?" "Equal time with my children," I said without a moment's hesitation. The words came out with a force that surprised even me. 50-50 custody, joint decision-making. I will not be reduced to a weekend father. I will not become a visitor who gets to take them to the movies while she makes all the real decisions about their schools, their health, their lives. I will not have her be the sole author of their childhoods. She studied me for a long moment, her expression unreadable. "That won't be easy," she said, her tone flat, factual. "The courts, despite progress, still tend to have a bias towards the mother in custody disputes, especially with a daughter as young as yours. And your wife's narrative, as you've pointed out, is compelling. She's an educator, the principal of a prestigious academy. Her entire professional life is about the well-being of children. You are a high-level executive in a demanding, travel-heavy industry. On paper, she has the advantage. She will paint a picture of you as a good man, a fine provider, but ultimately an absent father." "But that's not true," I insisted, leaning forward, the frustration boiling up again. "It's a lie. I've always been involved. I've coached Nora's soccer team. I'm the one who helps Caleb debug his code. Ask my kids. Ask their teachers, their doctors, their coaches." We will," Sloane assured me, holding up a hand to temper my outburst. And testimonials are important, but a judge will see it as a classic he said, she said situation. Her word against yours. Right now, her story is simpler and fits a more common stereotype. To win, we need more than testimonials. We need incontrovertible evidence. We need documented proof of your involvement in their daily lives. Proof that is so overwhelming it shatters her narrative completely. Uh, she paused, her eyes locking onto mine. So, I'll ask again. What evidence do you have? Calendar entries showing you attended school events? Email exchanges with teachers? Medical records indicating your presence at appointments? Photos of you at their activities? Text message chains about homework, friend issues, daily logistics? The more comprehensive, the better. As she spoke, something began to shift inside me. A slow, dawning realization. The chaotic, emotional turmoil in my mind began to recede, and in its place, the familiar, orderly structure of logic and data began to rise. Calendars, emails, records, logistics. I looked at Sloan Harding, the formidable lawyer who had just laid out the grim reality of my situation, and I felt the first glimmer of genuine hope since I'd walked out of that gala. I think, I said, my voice quiet but steady, I can do better than that. Sloan raised a single, perfectly sculpted eyebrow. I'm listening. I leaned forward, placing my hands on her desk. The last vestiges of the frantic, wounded husband fell away, replaced by the calm, focused confidence of the logistics director. Planning, documentation, and record-keeping are not just part of my job, I began, choosing my words with care. They are the core of my profession. My mind is trained to see life in terms of systems, patterns, and data streams. For the past 3 years, I've kept detailed records of everything, including every aspect of our family life. Now, I had her full and undivided attention. She put her pen down. What kind of records, Mr. Vance? She asked, her voice laced with a new sharp curiosity. Digital calendars, synced across all my devices, color-coded by child and activity type, with every single appointment, school event, and practice logged, including notations of which parent attended. Spreadsheets tracking shared household expenses, chore completion charts we tried to implement for the kids, and childcare arrangements for every time one of us was out of town. A complete archived digital folder of every school communication, every newsletter, every email from a teacher, every permission slip organized by child and school year. Photo albums on a cloud server, all time-stamped and geotagged, organized by date and event. I even have a log, I said, pausing, slightly hesitant to reveal the full extent of my systematic nature, of which parent handled which bedtime routine each night. Because we used to alternate reading with each child, and I built a simple tracker to ensure it was equitable. The silence that followed was profound. I watched Sloane's face, expecting judgment, perhaps even a flicker of alarm at this level of obsessive documentation. Instead, a slow, brilliant smile spread across her lips. It transformed her face, softening her severe features and lighting up her intelligent eyes. It was the smile of a predator who has just been handed the map to the hunting grounds. Mr. Vance, she said, her voice a low, appreciative murmur, I think you might be my favorite client, ever. She paused, tapping a thoughtful finger against her notepad. But I have to ask, why? Why did you keep such meticulous records of your family life? Most people don't document their parenting with spreadsheets. It was a fair question, one I had never really asked myself. It started as a work habit that spilled over, I explained, the answer becoming clear to me even as I said it. In logistics, there's a principle. If you don't track it, you can't measure it. And if you can't measure it, you can't improve it. I travel for work. My schedule can be demanding. I was terrified of becoming the father. Camille is now accusing me of being. So, I tracked everything. I wanted to be certain, with objective data, that I was holding up my end, that I was being the best, most present father I could be, despite my professional demands. It was my own personal quality control system. And your wife? Sloan asked. She never found this unusual? A humorless smile touched my lips. Camille doesn't concern herself with how I organize my time, as long as I meet her expectations and the check's clear. I said, unable to keep the edge from my voice. She just assumed I was working when I was on my laptop updating my systems. To be honest, I don't think she ever asked. Sloane nodded slowly, something that looked like genuine respect flickering in her eyes. Well, she said, picking up her pen again, her movements now filled with a new, vibrant energy. Her loss is most definitely our gain. Her narrative is built on a foundation of assumptions and stereotypes. We are going to demolish it with a mountain of cold, hard facts. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial, strategic tone. Here's what I want you to do. Go home, gather every piece of data you have. Every spreadsheet, every calendar entry, every archived email, every timestamped photograph, organize it, categorize it, and create a master file. I want a complete 3-year logistical history of your fatherhood. While you're doing that, I will be filing our response and preparing for discovery. I stood up, feeling taller than I had in years. The fear was gone, replaced by a surge of purpose. I was no longer a victim in Camille's drama. I was a strategist in my own. She thought this was a battle of emotions, of perceptions. She was wrong. This was a battle of information. And it was a battle I had been unknowingly preparing for my entire life. As I walked out of Sloane Harding's office and back into the chaotic city, the world looked different. The noise of the traffic, the sea of anonymous faces, the towering buildings, it wasn't chaos anymore. It was a complex, interconnected system, a supply chain. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt like I was back in control of my own. The next 3 months were a grueling war of attrition fought through legal filings, depositions, and mandatory mediation sessions that were exercises in barely concealed hostility. Camille's attorney, Gerald Hoffman, was exactly the man I'd pictured. Silver-haired, impeccably dressed, with a smooth, reassuring baritone that could likely make a venomous serpent sound like a victim. He was a master of narrative, a storyteller who specialized in representing the wealthy, powerful spouses of the city's elite. His strategy was simple and, on the surface, devastatingly effective. He painted me as a phantom. In his filings, and later in the courtroom, he didn't portray me as a bad father, but as an absent one, a man whose true marriage was to his career. Mr. Vance's demanding role at a multinational corporation, he argued during one particularly tense hearing, his voice resonating with paternalistic concern, requires frequent, often last-minute, travel and irregular, punishing hours. While this dedication is admirable in a professional context, this schedule is simply incompatible with the day-to-day stability and consistent presence that growing children, particularly a young daughter like Nora, need from a primary caregiver. He had Camille testify, and she was brilliant. She was the very picture of reluctant honesty, a mother forced into this painful position for the good of her children. She spoke softly, her voice occasionally catching with practiced emotion. She recounted nights I'd missed dinner due to late meetings, school events I'd allegedly arrived late to, a time Nora had a minor bike accident and, tellingly, had called her mother first. Each anecdote was a small, precise brushstroke on the canvas of my absence. Elias is a good father when he has the time, she said, dabbing at a non-existent tear with a silk handkerchief. Her gaze swept across the courtroom, landing briefly, sorrowfully on me. But his priority has always been his career. The children understand that. They've had to. Daddy's work comes first. It was a masterpiece of emotional manipulation. It hurt, not just because it was a gross distortion of the truth, but because I realized with a sickening certainty that she actually believed it. In her mind, any time I spent on my work was time stolen from the family, while any time she spent on hers was a noble sacrifice for the cause of education. Her worldview was so warped by her own ambition and social climbing that she could no longer see the reality that was right in front of her. She had curated her own truth for so long that it had become real to her. The hardest day was when they called Caleb to testify. He was 17 by then, on the cusp of manhood, and being forced to sit in a witness box and dissect his family for a room full of strangers felt like a violation. Hoffman was gentle with him, his questions designed to elicit confirmation of his mother's story without appearing to be leading him. "Caleb," he began, his voice soft, "your father travels quite a bit for work, doesn't he?" "Sometimes," Caleb replied, his voice quiet but clear. He didn't look at me or Camille. He stared at the judge. "And there have been times surely when he's missed a dinner or a school event because of a work emergency?" I held my breath. It was a trap. Of course there had been times, No working parent has a perfect record. Caleb hesitated for a fraction of a second. He's missed dinner before, he conceded. But he usually calls from the road to help me with my AP calculus homework, and I can't remember him ever missing a debate tournament. Not one. He glanced briefly in my direction, a flicker of solidarity in his eyes. He adjusted his whole Q3 travel schedule last year, so he could be at the regionals. Hoffman pressed on, sensing he was losing ground. But your mother, she's the one you and your sister would typically go to with day-to-day problems, isn't she? She's the more available parent? Caleb shifted in his seat. Mom is available, but Dad is the one who taught me to code. We have this thing we do on Sunday mornings. We work on our project. It's an AI logistics model. He listens. He's just efficient with his time. Efficient with his time. It was the highest compliment my son could give, a validation that came from the core of who we were together. Camille's face tightened. This was not the testimony she had expected. Her son, her brilliant, precious son, was not following the script. During the recess that followed, she cornered me in the hallway outside the courtroom, her composure finally slipping. Her eyes were blazing. "What did you say to him?" She hissed, her voice a low, venomous whisper. "What did you promise him to make him lie for you?" "I didn't say anything to him, Camille," I replied, my own voice quiet, devoid of the anger that was churning inside me. "That's the point you've been missing all along. I've been there. I've always been there. You just never bothered to look." "This isn't over," she said, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "Not by a long shot." "For once," I said, watching her storm back to her attorney's side, "we agree on something." "Oh." Throughout it all, I followed Sloane's advice to the letter. I remained calm, controlled, and focused. I answered Hoffman's questions directly and without emotion, refusing to be baited into anger or defensiveness. I presented the image of a reasonable man, a devoted father whose only goal was the well-being of his children. Then finally, it was our turn. Sloane stood, her presence commanding the room's attention. "Your Honor," she began, her voice crisp and clear. "For the past several weeks, this court has heard a compelling, if unsubstantiated, narrative about Mr. Vance's involvement in his children's lives. Rather than asking you to continue to rely on conflicting testimonies and subjective memories, we would like to present factual, verifiable documentation spanning the past 3 years. Mad." She nodded to her paralegal, who dimmed the courtroom lights and turned on a large monitor facing the judge's bench. "Your Honor, we present what we have come to call the logistics of fatherhood. It began with the calendars, side-by-side digital calendars for the last 36 months. Mine on the left, Camille's on the right. Every parent-teacher conference, dentist appointment, soccer game, piano recital, and school play was color-coded. Blue for events I attended, green for events Camille attended, and gold for events we both attended. The pattern was immediate, stark, and undeniable. My calendar was a sea of blue and gold. Hers was a patchwork of green, but with significant, noticeable gaps that often corresponded with board meetings, donor dinners, and educational conferences she attended. On paper, in the indisputable language of data, my attendance record was not just equal to hers, it was quantifiably better. I heard a sharp intake of breath from Camille's side of the room. Next, the communication logs. Sloane presented a curated selection of thousands of emails and text messages. An email thread between myself and Caleb's physics teacher, discussing his struggles with quantum mechanics, complete with links to articles I had found for him. A series of late-night text messages with Nora, calming her anxiety before a big social studies presentation. A chain of texts between me and the mother of Nora's best friend, coordinating a sleepover while I was on a business trip in Atlanta. Regular check-ins on the family group chat, filled with photos and inside jokes. "These are not, Your Honor," Sloane stated, her voice resonating with quiet power, "the cursory check-ins of a disengaged father. This is the log of an active, deeply involved parent." Then came the photographic evidence. A digital timeline, a slideshow of moments big and small. Me teaching Caleb how to parallel park in an empty lot. Me helping a frustrated Nora build a volcano for her science fair project. Both of us covered in clay and baking soda. Me at the finish line of Nora's 5K fun run. Family dinners, weekend hikes, holiday celebrations. The images flashed across the screen, a relentless chronological assault on Camille's narrative. I was there. I was always there. Finally, Sloan presented the pièce de resistance, the spreadsheets. The judge, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s named Judge Marion Hayes, initially looked skeptical at the introduction of Excel into a family law hearing. But as Sloan explained the methodology, the trackers for bedtime stories, homework help, drives to and from activities, days stayed home with a sick child, the judge's expression shifted to one of intense, focused interest. The data shows, Your Honor, Sloan concluded, that over the past 3 years, Mr. Vance handled 58% of school pickups. He was the parent who stayed home on 11 of the 14 days one of the children was sick. And he was present for 92% of all scheduled medical and dental appointments. These are not interpretations, they are facts. The courtroom was silent. The only sound was the soft hum of the projector. Judge Hayes paged through the thick binder of evidence we had provided, her brow furrowed in concentration. Finally, she looked up, her gaze settling on me. Mr. Vance, she said, her voice betraying a note of incredulity. This is rather comprehensive. Yes, Your Honor, I replied, my voice steady. Organization and documentation are central to my professional responsibilities. I applied the same principles to my family commitments. Some might find this level of record-keeping for family matters unusual, she observed, her eyes searching my face. Perhaps, I acknowledged, choosing my words carefully. But I found that in both my business and my personal life, good logistics prevent missed opportunities and ensure that nothing important falls through the cracks. My children are the most important part of my life. Why wouldn't I apply my best skills to being there for them? From the corner of my eye, I saw Camille's carefully constructed facade of calm confidence begin to crack. She was whispering urgently to Hoffman, who looked increasingly uncomfortable, like a man who had brought a knife to a gunfight. The judge turned her attention to my wife. Mrs. Preston, she said, her tone now decidedly cooler. These records appear to contradict several key claims in your testimony regarding Mr. Vance's availability and involvement. Would you care to address these discrepancies? Camille straightened her shoulders, summoning the last reserves of her formidable administrator's poise. Your Honor, she began, her voice smooth as silk. Anyone can keep a calendar. Anyone can log an email. What matters is the quality of the engagement, not just a quantitative record of physical presence. It was a good save, a pivot back to the subjective, the emotional. But Judge Hayes was not swayed. I agree, the judge replied, her eyes narrowing slightly. Which is why I find the content of these communications between Mr. Vance and his children particularly relevant. She tapped a finger on one of the printed-out text exchanges. This is not the conversation of a disengaged father, Mrs. Preston. This is the conversation of a parent who is actively helping his daughter navigate the complexities of middle school social dynamics. By the time the hearing concluded for the day, the momentum had irrevocably shifted. Camille's simple, compelling narrative, the story of the busy executive father versus the devoted educator mother, had crumbled against the sheer, unassailable weight of documented reality. She had built her case on a perception, an idea of who I was. I had built mine on the truth of what I had actually done. As we filed out of the courtroom, I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt an immense, bone-deep weariness. And for the first time, looking at Camille's pale, shaken face, I didn't see an adversary. I saw a woman who had become so lost in the story she was telling the world that she had forgotten the simple, verifiable truth of her own life. The final custody hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in early spring. The city had come alive with the tentative green of new leaves and the fragile beauty of cherry blossoms, a world of renewal that stood in stark contrast to the scorched earth landscape of my life. By then, the emotional and financial toll of the proceedings had eroded everyone. Caleb had grown quieter, retreating further into the silent, orderly world of his code. His grades, for the first time in his life, had slipped slightly. Nora had developed phantom stomach aches, a physical manifestation of the anxiety that twisted its way through our fractured family. She would cling to me when it was time to go to her mother's, and then, I heard from Camille's lawyer, would do the same when it was time to leave her. We had put our children on a rack and were pulling in opposite directions. Camille, when I saw her at the mandatory settlement conferences, looked perpetually tense. The effortless grace she projected to the world had been replaced by a brittle, high-strung energy. The strain showed in the tightness of her smile and the sharp, clipped cadence of her responses. I wasn't faring much better. The combined pressure of maintaining my professional responsibilities at a peak level while fighting the most important battle of my life left little room for anything else. I'd lost weight I couldn't afford to lose, slept in fragmented 2-hour bursts, and found myself constantly toggling between a state of hyper-focused determination and a bone-deep exhaustion that felt cellular. That morning, I arrived at the courthouse an hour early. I sat alone in my car in the parking garage, the engine off, the concrete tomb amplifying the sound of my own breathing. I leaned my head back against the seat, closed my eyes, and for 10 minutes, I did nothing. I didn't strategize. I didn't worry. I just gathered what was left of my strength for what was to come. This was the end game. After today, there would be a resolution, for better or worse. The system would finally produce an output. As I walked toward the building, the sun glinting off its imposing glass facade, I spotted Camille arriving with Hoffman. She saw me too. For a brief, unguarded moment, her steps faltered. I saw not an adversary, but a tired, frightened woman. Then, her posture straightened, her chin lifted, and she resumed her purposeful stride, the mask of the sterling crest headmistress firmly back in place. We hadn't spoken a single word directly to each other in weeks, all communication flowing through the cold, formal filter of our lawyers. Inside, the courtroom felt different. The air was thick with a finality that hadn't been there before. We took our places. I sat beside Sloan, my back ramrod straight, my hands clasped tightly in my lap to still their trembling. Gerald Hoffman made one last, impassioned attempt to salvage Camille's position. He spoke of her unique qualifications as an education professional, her deep understanding of child development, her unwavering commitment to the academic and emotional growth of not just her students, but her own children. He tried to frame my logistical evidence not as a sign of involvement, but as a symptom of a cold, detached personality, a man who managed his family like an inventory. Then Sloan rose for her final argument. She was calm, precise, and devastating. She didn't attack Camille. She simply returned, again and again, to the evidence. "Your Honor," she said, her voice filling the quiet room, "this case is not about which parent has the more admirable profession. It is not about which parent tells the more compelling story. It is about which parent has demonstrated, through consistent action, a commitment to being present for their children. The data does not lie. The data does not have an agenda. And the data in this case is unequivocal." She sat down. There was nothing more to be said. The narrative battle was over. Now, there was only the verdict. Judge Hayes looked down at the mountain of paperwork before her, then took off her reading glasses, rubbing the bridge of her nose. She looked from Camille to me, her expression stern, impossible to read. The silence stretched for an eternity. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat counting off the seconds of my future. Having reviewed all evidence and testimony presented in this matter, the judge began, her voice formal, devoid of emotion, and having considered the best interests of the minor children, Caleb and Nora Vance, this court hereby awards joint legal custody to both parents. I felt a sickening lurch in my stomach. Joint legal, with primary physical placement awarded to the father, Mr. Elias Vance. The words didn't register at first. They seemed to be in a foreign language. Primary physical placement. Mr. Elias Vance. I stared blankly at the judge, my mind struggling to process the information. I heard a sharp, strangled gasp from the other side of the room. It was Camille. "Mrs. Preston will have the children on alternating weekends from Friday evening to Sunday evening, and one overnight visit midweek," the judge continued, outlining the specifics of the arrangement, the division of holidays, the school breaks. Her voice became a distant drone. I remained perfectly still, my muscles locked, afraid that any movement, any breath, might somehow shatter this impossible, unbelievable reality. Sloan put a firm, steadying hand on my arm. Only then did I realize I was shaking. I had won. I hadn't just survived, I had won. The relief was so sudden, so overwhelming, it nearly buckled my knees. "This decision," the judge continued, now looking directly at both of us, her gaze lingering on Camille, "is based on the documented patterns of involvement, the stability of the proposed home environment, and, to a degree, the expressed preferences of the older child. The court finds that Mr. Vance has demonstrated an exceptional and well-documented commitment to maintaining consistent, engaged parenting despite his professional obligations. She paused, then added a final, devastating coda. I would also note for the record that Mrs. Preston's apparent dismissal of her husband's professional contributions, while simultaneously and substantially, depending on the financial benefits of that work, raises concerns for this court about the modeling of a respectful partnership for the children. Camille's face, which had been pale with shock, now flushed a deep, painful crimson. It was a complete and total repudiation not just of her legal case, but of the entire worldview she had built around herself. She had been judged not by the prestige of her title, but by the content of her actions, and she had been found wanting. I felt no triumph in her humiliation. There was no sweet taste of victory. There was only a profound, hollow relief that the life I had built with my children would remain intact. As the judge concluded and the bailiff called the next case, we all rose. I stood there for a moment, disoriented, as Sloane shook my hand firmly. "Congratulations, Elias," she said, a rare, genuine smile touching her lips. "You earned this." I could only nod. The words stuck in my throat. As we turned to leave, Camille approached me. Hoffman tried to put a restraining hand on her arm, but she shook him off. Her face was a mask of fury, her eyes glittering with unshed tears of rage. She stopped directly in front of me, forcing me to meet her gaze. Her voice was low, controlled, but it vibrated with a white-hot anger that was almost palpable. "Congratulations on your victory," she said, the word victory dripping with venom. "I hope managing the children's lives proves as satisfying as managing your precious supply chains." I looked at her, really looked at her, past the anger in the designer suit, and for a fleeting moment I felt an unexpected wave of sadness for the two young people we had once been, drinking cheap wine and sharing impossible dreams in a tiny Boston apartment. What had happened to us? "They're not cargo, Camille," I said, my voice quiet, weary. "They're our children, and I'm not interested in victory. I just wanted to be their father. I would have happily, gratefully shared that responsibility equally with you." "Save the Nobility Act," she hissed. "You wanted to punish me for what I said at the party. You wanted to humiliate me." "No," I said, and the truth of it resonated deep within me. I wanted to protect them, and I wanted to protect myself from someone who couldn't see value in anything that didn't enhance her own status. I took a small step closer, forcing her to hold my gaze. "You didn't lose because I outmaneuvered you in court. You lost because you couldn't imagine that moving boxes might require the same intelligence, dedication, and skill as molding young minds. You lost because you underestimated me. You always have." She stared at me, speechless once more, her mouth opening and closing silently. The truth of my words, a truth far more damaging than the judge's ruling, seemed to have finally landed. She had no counter-argument. There was no data she could spin, no narrative she could construct to refute it. Without another word, she turned, her shoulders rigid with a dignity that was heartbreaking in its defeat, and walked away. I watched her go, a solitary figure retreating down the long marble hallway. The war was over. The chessboard was clear. But as I stood there, the victor in a battle I had never wanted to fight, I knew the hardest part was yet to come, rebuilding a life from the wreckage. The immediate aftermath of the verdict was both harder and easier than I could have ever anticipated. Harder because a court order cannot magically mend the delicate, intricate systems of a family. You cannot issue a decree for happiness. The children, caught in the gravitational pull of our defunct marriage, struggled with the transition. Caleb, perhaps because at 17 he was old enough to grasp the underlying dynamics, adapted more quickly. He treated my apartment as his base of operations, filling his new room with the familiar hum of his custom-built PC and the comforting clutter of programming manuals. Our Sunday morning coding sessions became our sanctuary, a quiet space where the unspoken tensions of our new reality could be smoothed over by the clean, predictable logic of Python. He never spoke directly about the trial, but one afternoon, as we were debugging a particularly nasty piece of code, he looked up from his monitor and said, "I'm glad I don't have to switch houses every 3 days. It's easier to focus here." It was as close to an endorsement as he was capable of giving, and I held on to it like a lifeline. Nora, however, was a different story. My bright, empathetic daughter vacillated between periods of clinging attachment and sudden, angry withdrawal. She was testing the new system, searching for faults, pushing at the boundaries of my commitment at every turn. Her life had been fragmented, and she was terrified that I, too, would prove to be an unreliable part of it. The breaking point came one night, about 2 weeks after the custody ruling. I found her sitting on the floor of her new bedroom, a room I had so carefully tried to make her own, surrounded by half-unpacked boxes. She was sobbing quietly, her small shoulders shaking. The sight of her broke through the weary numbness that had enveloped me since the trial. "Hey, sweetheart," I said softly, sitting down on the floor beside her amidst the scattered belongings. "What's going on?" She looked up, her face blotchy and streaked with tears. "I hate this," she whispered, her voice thick with misery. "I hate having 2 houses and 2 bedrooms and 2 of everything. I hate having to remember which stuff is where and which parent I'm supposed to be with on which day." Art. Her words pierced me. This was the exact outcome I had fought so hard to prevent the splintering of her sense of security. I hadn't saved her from the wreckage. I had just designated which piece of it would be her primary home. "I know it's hard, honey," I said, not trying to fix it, just acknowledging her pain. "It's a huge adjustment for all of us." "Mom says it's your fault," she said, her eyes, so much like her mother's, watching my reaction carefully. "She says you chose your job over our family." I took a deep, steadying breath, fighting the surge of anger at Camille for poisoning our daughter with her own bitter narrative. "Do you believe that?" I asked gently. She shrugged, picking at a loose thread on the carpet. "I don't know. You do work a lot." "I do," I acknowledged. "And I'm so sorry if that ever made you feel less important. But Nora, I need you to look at me." I waited until her tear-filled eyes met mine. "There is nothing in my life, not my job, not my projects, not anything that matters more to me than you and Caleb. Ever." "Then why couldn't you and Mom just stay together?" she asked, her voice cracking on the last word. "How do you explain the complex calculus of adult disappointment to a 12-year-old? How do you explain that sometimes love isn't enough when respect has been eroded beyond repair?" "Sometimes," I said, choosing my words with the precision of a logistician planning a critical shipment, "2 people can both love their children very, very much, but still not be good at being married to each other. Mom and I, we started seeing the world in very different ways. But that has nothing to do with how much we both love you. That part will never, ever change." She was quiet for a long moment, processing this. "I'm still mad at you," she said finally. "That's okay," I replied, my voice thick with emotion. "You're allowed to be mad. You can be as mad as you want, for as long as you want. But I'm not going anywhere, Nora. No matter how mad you get, no matter how hard this is, I am right here, and we'll figure it out. Together." "And if..." She nodded slightly, then leaned her head against my shoulder, a silent surrender. I put my arm around her, and we sat like that for a long time, 2 survivors huddled together amidst the chaos of her half-unpacked life. It wasn't a resolution, but it was a beginning. The easier part came in the quiet spaces, once the constant battle with Camille had subsided. Freed from the relentless need to justify my existence, I found reserves of patience and resilience I hadn't known I possessed. I recalibrated my work schedule with a ruthlessness I had previously reserved for underperforming distribution centers. I delegated more, empowered my team, and leveraged the technology we'd built to work smarter, not harder. I found a new, sustainable equilibrium that allowed me to be fully present for my kids while still excelling at my job. Camille, to her credit, eventually moved beyond the initial, raw bitterness of her defeat. The first 6 months were a cold war of terse emails and curbside exchanges. But time, and perhaps the undeniable stability of the new arrangement, began to soften her edges. We managed our first civil conversation about Caleb's college applications. By the 1-year mark, we could attend school functions without a palpable field of tension shimmering between us, though we carefully maintained our distance. The night that marked a true shift in our new supply chain came unexpectedly. Nora, now in middle school, had landed the lead role of Dorothy in her school's production of The Wizard of Oz. Camille and I had, as was our custom, arranged to sit separately. But as the lights dimmed and my daughter appeared on stage, a slip of a girl in a gingham dress with a powerful, clear voice, I glanced over and saw Camille. She was watching Nora with an expression of such naked pride and unconditional love that it transcended everything else. In that moment, I saw the woman I had first fallen in love with, the passionate, fiercely devoted idealist. Those qualities hadn't vanished. They had just been misdirected, warped by ambition until they became unrecognizable. After the performance, we both waited in the crowded hallway to congratulate our star. When Nora emerged, still in costume but with her ruby slippers in hand, her face lit up at seeing us both standing there. "You were magnificent," Camille told her, enveloping her in a hug. "A star," I agreed, waiting my turn for an embrace. Nora looked between us, a cautious, hopeful light in her eyes. "Can we all go for ice cream, please? Like we used to?" Camille and I exchanged a glance over our daughter's head. It was a silent, complex negotiation. I gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. She hesitated for a heartbeat, then her shoulders relaxed. "I think that would be nice," she said. At the ice cream parlor, sitting across a sticky table from Camille, with our children happily chattering between us, I realized something profound. We would never be what we once were. That system was permanently offline. But we could still be what our children needed us to be. Parents who respected each other enough to set aside their own wounds for the sake of a shared, precious cargo. "How's the new automation project going?" Camille asked during a lull in the conversation. "The one you were launching this quarter." I was so caught off guard by her apparent interest that I paused, spoon halfway to my mouth. "It's going well, actually. The predictive algorithm is showing even better results than projected." She nodded. "Caleb was explaining some of it to me. It sounds revolutionary, if I understood him correctly." Our son looked up, a faint blush on his cheeks but pleased. "Dad's team is basically teaching an AI to predict inventory needs before a human even knows they exist. It's pretty advanced stuff." I glanced at my son with a surge of pride. He'd been listening to my work stories more carefully than I'd realized. "It is," Camille agreed, and for the first time in years, she met my eyes directly, without artifice or animosity. I should have paid more attention sooner. It wasn't an apology, not exactly, but it was an acknowledgement, a small, significant recognition of value where once there had been only dismissal. "Well," I said carefully, "we all have our blind spots." A fine, sad smile touched her lips. "Indeed we do. 3 years have passed since that night. 3 years since Elias manages boxes became the line that ended our marriage. But paradoxically, began my own reclamation of self. I still run the regional logistics division, now with expanded responsibility for implementing our AI systems nationwide. Camille is still the head mistress at Sterling Crest, though I hear she has instituted a new STEM initiative focusing on, of all things, supply chain technology and global sustainability. It's a small irony that I appreciate but have never mentioned. Caleb is now a sophomore at, yes, Caltech, studying computer science with a focus on machine learning applications for infrastructure systems. He calls them the world's biggest boxes. Nora, at 15, shows signs of combining both our strengths, Camille's polished communication skills with my own analytical precision. She wants to be an environmental lawyer. And Camille and I, we have achieved a functional, respectful, co-parenting relationship. We will never be friends, but we have learned to see each other as valuable, if separate assets in our children's lives. Sometimes I think about Alistair Croft and that fateful moment at the gala. About 6 months after the divorce was finalized, my phone rang. It was him. "Elias Vance," he said when I answered. "Alistair Croft. We met briefly at a Sterling Crest function." "No." "I remember," I assured him, my curiosity piqued. "Good. Listen, I've been following your company's work on predictive logistics systems, a fascinating application of machine learning. I'd like to discuss a potential integration with some of Nexus Innovation's retail platforms. Would you be open to a meeting?" I was momentarily speechless. I'd be very interested in hearing more." "Excellent," he said. Then he paused. "And Elias? For what it's worth, I've always thought logistics was where the real magic happens. Anyone can design a product, getting it exactly where it needs to be, exactly when it's needed. That's the art form most people never even see." We ended up partnering on a pilot project that's now expanding nationwide. Turns out managing boxes was exactly the expertise his multi-billion-dollar company needed. I never told Camille about that partnership, though I'm sure she eventually found out through her extensive social network. Some victories are sweeter when savored privately. And honestly, it wasn't about proving anything to her anymore. I was operating on a different metric now. Last month, I was invited to give a guest lecture at Sterling Crest's new Business and Technology Symposium, an event Camille had spearheaded. Standing at the podium, looking out at a room full of bright young faces, including our daughter Nora in the front row, I felt an unexpected sense of completion. Logistics isn't just about moving things from point A to point B, I told the students. It's about understanding the intricate connections that make our world function. It's about seeing the hidden patterns in the chaos. And most importantly, it's about recognizing that every single link in the chain has value, that the people loading the trucks matter just as much as the executives in the boardroom. As I spoke, I caught Camille's eye. She was standing at the back of the auditorium. She gave me a small, deliberate nod, not of friendship, not of love, but of respect. Finally, in my field, we have a concept called optimal failure. It's when a system breaks down in precisely the right way to reveal a critical flaw, allowing you to rebuild it stronger and more resilient than before. My marriage was an optimal failure. Its collapse showed me exactly what needed to be rebuilt. Not the relationship itself, but my own unwillingness to demand respect, my own failure to stand firmly in my own worth. That night, walking out of the gala while Camille worked her prestigious circles, I thought I was leaving everything behind. I was wrong. I was walking toward everything that truly mattered. My self-respect, my children's respect, and the quiet, unshakable knowledge that managing boxes might not shape the world's future leaders, but it had made me exactly the man and the father I needed to be.